Lovely to see you tonight. We are continuing with our conversations with the land theme that we've been touching in and out of over the past few weeks. And we have tonight Angharad with us, which is always wonderful, and Bríd Walsh will be talking with Angharad. So I think for those of you who received a reminder today, you will have got Bríd's details, but we've been really excited about her coming tonight. So I will let Angharad introduce her properly. And just for me to say hi, lots of love. Your work on the 1 square mile, Angharad, I was going to remind you, was the work that we set after the last speaking session. So if there's a moment at the end, it might be great to hear any sharings about that now that we've got Angharad with us. But in the meantime, I will hand you over, and also hello to everybody on the recording, of which I think there will be quite a few this week. So brilliant. Over to you, Angharad. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Noswetha, good evening. It's really lovely to see your lovely faces and be here with you this evening. And I'm really delighted to introduce you to my friend Bríd Walsh. Brid grew up in County Cork in Ireland, with all that entailed at the time around the culture, deeply immersed in language and nature, daughter of a forester. And she's a third generation in her family with a deep sensitivity to land. And Brid and I met a few weeks ago at a dialogue that Rachel was kind of partly organising in a place called 42 Acres in Somerset. And it was a dialogue, a delegation we brought together to talk about land-based spirituality. And I think, Brid, it took until almost the end of that that kind of few days, I only came in part way through, for us to start to kind of chat. We'd interacted a little bit and we started to chat. And I was blown away, I think, by this dream job that Brid has got. Brid, you're employed by 42 Acres to be a mediator with the spirit of the land, and that feels to me to be quite a unique job. I mean, first of all, just tell us a little bit about that, and then I'd like to dig into the story of how you got to that point and your story with developing your sensitivity. But just tell us a little bit about that role, because it's quite unique, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for your time this evening. I appreciate very much being invited and being part of your community this evening. To answer your question, Angharad, I came across 42 Acres a few years ago. It's an estate in Somerset, near Witham Friary, and I went there with my wife Claire to look for a retreat centre in the UK to run a retreat. We had been running retreats in different parts of the world, and because we were post-lockdown or just coming out of lockdown, we decided to find a place in the UK. And when I stepped onto the land at 42 Acres, the message I received was that it was not for us to run a retreat at 42 Acres, but to run a retreat for the team and the staff. So that was basically it. It was not more complicated, but it's like, no, you must begin with the land was the message. And then so it was a bit of an odd, you know, when you go somewhere with perceptions or ideas of why you're there and the purpose of your visit to a particular place, and then hearing something completely unexpected and different, kind kind of blew my mind too, you know. But I've learned to trust what I hear. And in that trust, I thought, okay. So I said okay at the time to the land. I didn't know what it would look like. I said okay, and I'm willing. And the rest unfolded, honestly. It's not mysterious, it's not formulaic. It's been very organic, and it's been an incredible privilege to be trusted by the custodians of the estate, to actually even consider this work, you know. So when we were there, we had our visit and came away, and then I did approach one of the staff, and we had a conversation, and I began to see things in the space. And remember, I said to the land I was willing, but generally I would always ask permission from the custodians or the owner of the land, but this stuff kept appearing, and a woman who works there suggested we meet the owner. So met with the owner and talked about the possibility of a connection between the functioning of the business and the impact the energetics of the land were having on the business. So, for example, if there is a particular flow or lack of flow of energy in a space, it can show up as a high, let's say, a high sickness level in a team, where you have a high level of absenteeism. You might have a high level of lack of cooperation or lack of flow within a space. There may be other things, energy leaking in other places. So it can be chaotic is a bit of a strong word, but you can sometimes ask yourself, what's going on here? You know, something isn't right, and how do we get back into the flow of the intention behind the vision for the place? So that's where it began, really, to be honest. Does that answer your question?
It does, and it fascinates me, and I'm really excited to track what happens. Not what happens in your relationship with the land, although that's fascinating, but what happens as this idea and as how the impact of what you're doing begins to be noticed and spread, and what potentially might happen to establishing this way of working as a far more normal way of being with the land again. That's very exciting for me. But I want to take you back now, because it's not everybody that you know can have that and move into what you did. Everybody can, but in the world that we're in at the moment, there's a particular journey, and many on this call tonight have also been called to that journey in different ways. So we're always fascinated by the journeys that our guest speakers have taken. So talk to me a little bit about that, because I'm sure it's a winding road, I imagine.
Yes, it has been, and it's not complete. That's the first thing I would say. So as a child, as a very small child, growing up in West Cork, I remember hearing animals particularly, and hearing almost like a whisper in the trees, and sitting, there was a brook or a stream at the back of our house, and sitting on my haunches with my fingers in the water and just feeling nothingness, and yet everything around me all at the same time. It was almost like, it was like a split state. There was complete stillness, and yet I could hear the birds, and I could almost taste the water through my fingers. And that continued as I grew up. My father was a forester, as you mentioned, and his friend was a water diviner. And my father and Dan used to have requests for buildings, how to build a house on a particular part of land, in what direction to build the property, what, like, people knew that there was a certain flow. It was almost an unspoken thing, really, because I remember farmers would never plow in a particular field if there was a fairy fort. And that's still, to this day, in rural parts of Ireland, that's still the truth. And that those lands are farmed around the fairy forts now, I've noticed. A few years ago when I visited some, but it's minimal disturbance, to be honest. And people in the local community would say, oh, I'm going to take all those stones out of that field. And older people in the community would say, do not touch that field. Do not move those stones, because if you disturb the fairies, basically you don't want to disturb, almost like the other life, you know. Bogs in Ireland are considered spaces where transitions happen. The murky waters are a film between this world and another world. So I grew up, I suppose, steeped in that, in the folklore, but it was a truth. I feel privileged to have had that experience, that it wasn't just a mystery to be laughed at, or superstition or anything like that. It was real in the culture. And the Irish language, I grew up, Irish is my first language. English is my second language. And, you know, there are 32 words for field. I think I mentioned that before, in the Irish language. And somebody's written a book saying about that, 32 words for field. So there's a very intimate relationship. I grew up in that culture of the intimacy between our environment and how it nourishes us, how it holds us, how it feeds us, how it protects us. And in the rhythm of the seasons, life appeared more simple than it does now, you know. Yeah. And that journey continued until I was about a teenager, with the hearing of sounds and the whispering on the trees, and nobody was talking about it within my own family, I suppose. Apart, Dad talked a little bit about it, but I found myself needing to turn it down because it was really loud. And I
did you
did.
do that? Yeah. How, you know, was that conscious, or
I remember.
To the fore?
Say
Okay, go
again.
for it. Was it really conscious, or was it that other life takes over and becomes louder? I'm thinking of teenage years in particular.
I do remember having my hands over my ears and just saying, it's too loud, it's too loud. So that's my only memory. And I think that's almost a command, isn't it, to say, whoever's listening to me, I need you to turn it down. So then teenage life, yeah, in rural Ireland, playing sports, and so I did turn it down, but it was never far away, but I did turn it down. It's almost like I wasn't living through it. If it's not clear, I'd love to.
Living through, I'm fascinated, because I mean, I want to come back to language later, because I think language is incredibly important, and we talk a lot about how we re-language our experiences, our animate experiences. Talking of language, Caddy, my collie, is speaking. But I'm interested in when you say living through it, just if you can kind of express that a little bit more.
So it's almost like wearing a coat. And when you wear this coat, it's like wearing a coat with a hedgehog spine. And it's like walking through life with that many receptors, receiving 600 different kinds of information. And it's like whispers and chatter, and it's like whisper over here, and it's almost like static on a line. So when I turned it down or took off the coat, I felt I had space to be in the world that I was in, with being the youngest child, with my family, my grandparents, my parents, my school, my local school. Yeah, it's almost like, I think there's a separation, Angharad, that's happened for me. I think there was a separation on a level that happened for me. But I wasn't completely separate. But I do think I created some kind of separation.
Usually, when I speak to people, my story is the same, really. Usually when that separation is created, it only becomes sustainable in our life for a certain amount of time before there's a real call back that becomes very viscerally necessary. What
Yeah.
was
Yes, I can totally resonate with that. And for me, the calling came through in my early 20s, I was 20. And it came through body work, and it came through massage, and it came through the teaching of connectivity and opening the sensitivity in my hands led me to open my sensitivity in other spaces within me, So I felt my receptors reopen for sure at that time.
And how has it kind of developed since? What's the story since?
So moving on from the body work, I went on to do counseling. I trained as a counselor because of people's reactions on the table and the connection to the energetics with somebody on the table. I studied counseling with the College of Holistic Medicine in order to support people to make sense of what happens on the table, if you like. What I mean by that, let me just give some context. When we're really present in our hands as body workers, and when we invite people to meet us in that space within their own body, wherever it might be, when I sit in my heart and hold my heart in my hand, and let's say meet you in your left shoulder, it's just, and you receive my heart in your left shoulder, it creates an opportunity for an energetic, almost melting to happen. So if there's a traumatic injury or anything that's trapped in the body, because things do get trapped in our bodies, once we can meet somebody in a safe enough space to go to that trapped energy, we can transmute or release that energetic process. And sometimes that's crying, for example. Sometimes that's coughing. So I trained as a counselor to be able to do some talk therapy, to be able to bring somebody on the journey appropriately and safely, really. It's like I needed to upskill myself for the depth at which I was finding myself.
And isn't it interesting that, you know, your childhood experiences seem to be, you were very much listening to the natural world. And of course, you know, human beings, of course, we're part of the natural world. But the focus that brought you back was through humanity in some way.
Yeah. And through my body, through my own body, and through my own, I suppose, evolution, or probably involution is a better word to choose, through my own involution into my own self-knowing and my reconnection with myself. I was able to hold space for other people to meet me there. Yeah.
And how does that, and I'm sure there's more of the story, and please, you know, feel free to unpack it, but I'm interested in how, so then, you know, the reconnection happens through body work and your own body and working with people, but then of course it goes out again, back into the natural world at large once more. What was that journey?
So I found myself in a situation of opening up again. And then I also found it, again, almost difficult to manage the receptivity, to the point where I would take things on that were actually other people's energies. And I worked with Imaho, bless his soul, and I had an opportunity to explore what was mine and what was in fact somebody else's. So because we're actually all energy, every single part of the universe is energy. And when we meet each other, there's we intertwine, our fields intertwine a little bit. So I might take something on that's really none of my business or nothing to do with me, but because I feel empathy for somebody, I want, if I were to not be comfortable witnessing somebody else in pain, I might want to take it from them. And I was a bit confused about that for a while. And then I got support and learned how to separate, how to stay in my own lane. And untangle myself from people. And that made such a huge difference. I can't tell you. That was a game changer for me.
You'll have to get the secret of that one day. I would love to learn that one myself.
It's not difficult, and I'd be happy to share it. Yeah. It just takes practice, and it's all practice, isn't it? I feel like I might be on a bit of a tangent, so I need you to rein me in if I'm.
No, I'm interested in this journey back into the natural world.
So,
natural connection with place. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I was in Spain, and where I grew up in Gugambara in West Cork, it's surrounded by mountains, and there's a lake there. And there was this particular mountain in the south of Spain. It's called Grazalema. It's in Andalusia. And I was climbing the mountain one day, and I heard the mountain, just like you and I are speaking now. And I just turned around. It's one of those moments, it's like, is there somebody behind me? And I stopped and I sat with the mountain. And I just gave it time. And I went back and I listened. And the mountain asked me for a ceremony that would reconnect it with other mountains it had been separated from. So there was a very specific mountain in Marbella. There was one mountain in Marbella, one mountain in Grazalema, and a third mountain so there was a trinity or a tripod that wanted to be reunited. So I called my friend in Ireland and Claire. I sat at one mountain, Claire sat at another mountain, and my friend represented the third mountain, which was in Ireland. And we did a ceremony together, and they kindly came together and said, okay, what are we going to do? And I said, I don't know yet. We need to listen. So we were on Zoom back in 2017 or 16, I can't quite remember, and it started. So we did the reconnection using ourselves almost like glasses of water as vessels for energy to reconnect, to be points on this trinity. And I asked to know when this connection had been complete. And when it was complete, it was complete. I heard it's done. And then it was like, okay, dissolve. We dissolved our connection, our three. And yeah, that was it. The other thing I'd like to share with you is in 1979, I was 9. There was a massive oil tanker in Bantry Bay that exploded, and it was full of oil. There was an oil storage facility there. And it happened at night, and I remember seeing the orange hue on the sky. Bantry is about 15 miles from where I grew up. And I was in Bantry and in the area, and I saw, not like I'm seeing you now, but I saw the fish. I saw the seaweed. I saw the kelp. And they were looking, it was all things were looking at me from the sea. And I thought, gosh, what's happening here? So I said, show me what to do. So I asked, and I went to a point on the Glengariff Road where I could see where it had happened. And I sat there and I said, what do you want me to do? And the sea, not so much the sea, but the real deep down in the basin of the bay, wanted the energetics of the trauma from the oil spill to be removed. So I was like, I just thought to myself, you couldn't make this stuff up. You know, it's almost like, it's like, am I making this up? And it's like, no, how would I, you know, and I can see the fish looking at me and the kelp way, you know, it's like, come on, Bríd, you've got to trust yourself. So I was like, okay, show me what to do. So again, I sat into my heart and I did a ceremony overlooking the bay. And when it was complete, again, I heard it's complete. And then a few weeks went by and I checked and I had a look. And I saw, what I saw was almost like, you know, the luminescent little, not fit. Sorry?
Phosphorescence or something
Yes.
like that.
It wasn't phosphorescence, but I saw the essence of something really bright in the sea. And I thought, gosh, you know, it's one of those things where you rub your eyes and you think, oh, I'm never going to see it with this eye. I have to trust what I'm seeing. So a number of things like that happened with land trauma in Ireland, where another site where I just get a message, go up in the morning and, you know, I just went to a particular site. It was a part of West Cork I didn't know very well. And I just sat outside the car and I looked at this mountain and I said, you have to show me because I don't know. I don't actually know what you want me to do or why I'm here. And then all I saw was horses running across, not actual horses, but I saw a flash of horses, or some kind of battle had happened in this place. I didn't know there was a battle in history in that place at the time. So it asked me to bring some healing. So I asked, how did it want me to do that? And one of the things was to say sorry on behalf of the human race to the animals that were killed in the battle, and also to apologize to the landscape respectfully that a lot of damage had been done. And it was really curious. I met a local farmer and I noticed a house had been burned. It was out of my eye line before I did the ceremony, but I walked a bit further on and I met a farmer and I said, gosh, there's a house burned there. And he said, oh, Miá is the phrase in Irish for bad luck. There's a Miá down on that place. And it was the place I had done the clearing. So somebody had built a house there. they had divorced. It had gone really badly. I didn't know any of this because it's not a part I know. And the man died in the fire in the house. So like, I just want to say that there's stuff around us possibly contributing to other things. And if we can listen and support each other to listen more acutely and trust what we're hearing, there's stuff we can do.
It's fascinating. And I think it's very timely that we're talking about this, because one thing that's very present in many conversations that I have at the moment is human beings not really having a sense of what our role is here, not having a, not really, we as a humanity, we can be very down on ourselves. And it's really interesting to hear you talk about land asking us for help, that there's a role for us in this interaction with all things. And I'd be interested to hear about your sense of that more broadly.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding of my life is I am one with source. I am one with spirit. And I don't have a doubt in any cell in my body about that. I absolutely know that in my knower, you know. It's true. I have so much evidence now for myself. I can sit comfortably in that space. So I'm here to taste what chocolate tastes like. I'm here to have a human incarnation and a human experience. And for me personally, I'm here to bring my heart to the world. I'm here to bring unconditional love and to talk about unconditional love in the world. I didn't know that for 40 plus years, but it became clearer and clearer. So with the land, it's like, I've got post-its here. There's a density to this paper, right? It's a density. There's a density to me. There's a density to you. There's a density to this glass. There's a density to the water in the glass. So if we can imagine a place that we're living in a world where there is no separation. Separation has created, I think, the problems where we're at now in humanity. And this conversation is so important because I think we're actually here to remember that we're not separate. We're here to remember we're part of something so vast that our human mind can't quite process it.
I've often said I would like to end my years on this life looking back at this age that I've lived through as the time of the great remembering.
Right.
I sense that the mere fact that there are however many of us gathered here and the community that's building around this work, not just through Animate Earth, but in so many other places. It feels almost as if creation is calling us back, that there is a turning back. Your story is quite interesting because your father had a lineage connection, it seems, to this work and way of being. You're at the tail end of that. You dropped out of it, but came back to it. And I think for most people in the West, it's within 2 or 3 generations where we've forgotten this. It's not actually that far back, but we are coming back to it as if we feel it's new, and then something in us knows it's very deep and it's not new and it's incredibly familiar. And there's a relief.
Yeah.
When we let sway into this work. And it's really interesting, one of the things, and those on the call will have probably heard me talk before about this. James Hillman thinks that we were wrongly named Homo sapiens. He thinks we should be Homo appreciatus, because part of the humans, for him, part of what he thought humans were here for was to appreciate creation and to speak its beauty and the awe that we feel back to it, and to be receptive in that relationship. So much of what you've been talking about being asked to support the recreation of an energy network between mountains.
Yeah,
So it's like, so why can't the mountains do that themselves? What is our bit of the jigsaw in that? What is it that humans bring to this?
I think for me personally, my opinion is I think we bring if you can imagine, it's like we bring an acknowledgement or an appreciation, I think is the word you used. And it's like energetics, but like a thought is an energy, right? So if there's enough, let's say, bad or negative thought to something, there's a toxicity maybe to it, or who was the man who took the photographs of the water? Moto? No, not.
I know. I was looking.
Dr. Emoto?
Dr. Emoto. Thank you. And I mean, that speaks volumes alone, how we can actually hold a frequency that changes the molecular structure of this. Imagine if we were to hold a frequency of unconditional love, which is something I do as much as I can, and it's growing. Imagine if we were to hold that frequency and hug a tree, for example. Imagine if we were to hold that frequency and hug each other. Imagine if we were to hold that frequency in our hands, as I do the body work. Imagine the impact on ourselves and on nature if we were to actually be that intentional with how we plant our crops, how we dig or don't dig the soil, how we consider how we're planting. What are we planting in circles? Are we planting in, a tree will know where it wants to go. We just need to ask, where do you want to go? Where's the optimum place for you? Because it's going to be there when I'm in ashes, the tree is going to still be there. So it will tell me, because it's, you know, so with land, I think I think really we're here in this amazing group as advocates for something that we need to give each other the confidence to stand up and have the confidence outside our personality selves to be able to say, this is the truth. We're coming back to our remembering, like you say, Angharad, I totally agree with you. It's our time to remember that we're not separate. We are connected. And let's remind each other.
So much of that work, one of the things that I think is so potent and important in that work is exactly what we're doing tonight. And when we open this up for discussion later, I'm sure there will be even more of it happening, is when we honestly, openly and vulnerably share these experiences, because it gives others permission to trust in experiences that they are beginning to have or have had and have maybe been quashed, or they've been told that it's silly, or you're just a dreamy kid, or whatever, that they're real for them, and that they're important, actually, that they're central to our experience of life. So I want to ask you a little bit about what you think is important, the important things that we can do for ourselves on our own journey into this work.
I think one of the most important things we can do for ourselves is to say yes if we're asked or if we're given a choice. But in the saying yes, know that it can be a workout. When we say yes to things, there will be growth opportunities in our lives because we said yes to something. You said earlier about how wonderful it is for me to have to do the work I do at 42 acres and being on the land and supporting the land and supporting the team. I also must stay in my own practice, in my own involution and growth, to be able to hold those things too. So I woke up at 5:30 yesterday morning. I'm currently in Hampshire. And I had a message and it was, go to Somerset. And I was like, really? And I said to Claire, it's 6 a.m. I've been awake for half an hour. All I'm hearing is go to Somerset. And she was like, well, you have to go then. And I wasn't scheduled to be there, right? And I was like, okay. So I got in the car and I drove there. And it was absolutely perfect timing for something that I won't talk about here, but it was perfect timing for support. It was perfect timing. And it was a long day. And it's like, okay, that was the piece. So when we practice and we hear something then we take the step. I have also, by the way, just so you all know, not listened plenty of times. And I have had consequences to the not listening. And that's also been part of my learning. So when Claire came home from Spain, having run a retreat, and she said, I don't know how to say this, but we need to sell our house and leave Ireland. I burst into tears and I said, I just need a bit of time. And I went away, and I not went away as in left the house or anything. I took time for myself, and 3 weeks later I came back and opened up the conversation again and said, right, I'm ready. If that's what you heard, I'm ready. And if I hadn't taken that move, because when I was 32, sat on the hall of that floor in my house and I said, I've got to do more. And when I was thinking about talking to you all tonight, I thought, I must remind myself to tell you, where we end up, we often have asked for 20 years previously. Like, we've set an intention for something as well, to be the better version of ourselves. And it's not always what it looks like back then to the present day. We don't know what it looks like sometimes, and we just take the next step and take the next step. And I do take the next step when I hear, always, even if it doesn't make logical sense, because I know it's guidance. And that's why I knew when I saw the fish, saw the seaweed moving, not through my eyes, but through a different eye, I knew that I couldn't possibly have made this story up. I didn't know I was going to be the one to bring healing to that space 41 years later, or whatever, you know. So a personal practice, knowing that we are evolving all the time, is really important, in my opinion, for us to be able to keep ourselves and our own spiritual hygiene up to scratch, I suppose. It's a bit like, you know, we brush and floss our teeth on a regular daily basis, and we do that too. We need to do that with our practice. Nutrition, water. Does that answer your question?
I think it does. I have one last one for this evening before we open it to questions and discussion.
Sure.
I've heard you talk a lot about hearing, and I'm very aware that, well, my experiences when I work with people is that people have different ways of sensing this. Sometimes it's the body. For you, obviously, it's a kind of a heard sense, a word sense. And really wanted to drill down about, well, maybe I've got two questions then. First of all, to drill down how you, because it can be difficult. It can be difficult to distinguish between the ego and the heard voice, and it takes practice.
Yeah.
It takes to do that. Talk to me a little bit about how that's been for you, and how your sense of that, yes, what I'm hearing is what I'm hearing, has strengthened.
So our egoic self is opinionated, judgmental, for me, there's often, to help me distinguish, there's a story attached to it. So, for example, let me explain about the mountains. Okay, the connection of the mountains in Spain. At no point did I feel, well, good for you. Look at the amazing thing you've, like, I didn't create a kind of it's almost like, Angharad, I hope this explains it. There's a quietness. There's a contentment. There's a gentleness. It's not loud. I played sport, and when I was in Ireland, I played camogie and ladies football, and I was part of many winning teams, and I know how that egoic feeling feels, like, yay, God, we're brilliant. And I just don't feel that in any of this work, because I don't feel like it's really me, the personality self. I feel like I'm a vessel. That's how I feel. I'm a carrier of love, and I am appreciated for the work that I do. And it's lovely to hear when people say, thank you so much for your contribution, or, I really felt your gratitude for coming on the call tonight. And I really felt it from your heart, and it to my heart, if you like. But I didn't feel like I was rough, making my feathers puffed up or something. I'm probably not describing it very well.
One of I think the things that I distinguish it with is it has no sense of an aspiration for outcome. It just,
yes, that's beautifully languaged. Yeah. And there also, for me, there isn't a high or a low with it. It's like there's an equilibrium in the space, and like you say, no desire for outcome. It's holding the space really for the optimum outcome. That's a word I use a lot in my personal practice. Is optimum outcome, because I don't know if I say best outcome, best for whom or what. Optimum means whatever happens, I know is in service. Recently, one of my colleagues was delayed by 3 hours, and I talked to her about setting her intention for the flights. She was traveling to Europe, and I said to her about remember to set your intention for the optimum outcome for your flights. Anyway, her flight to Italy was on time. Her flight home was 2 to 3 hours delayed. And because of that, she didn't panic. She didn't get stressed. And she said, this is perfect timing. This is the optimum outcome, because that was her intention. And she walked into a situation where a family member was really ill when she arrived to the house. So she was able to support with an ambulance coming. And it was really intense. But she said to me, not once did she feel stressed. Because she knew it was perfect timing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, leaning into what is, leaning into what wants to be.
Yeah. So if we're unsure about whether it's our ego, is it my ego talking here? You could even say that to the universe or to the space. It's like, oh, I need your help to build confidence. Can you give me another sign? You ask, can you show me something else? I need some reassurance. I'll work on my self-doubt, universe. I'll work on my self-doubt, I promise. Right now, can you give me another sign? Can you show me something that would be really obvious for me as I build my confidence? And then the bulb blows or whatever. Or a door might swing without any wind. And it's like, okay.
We've been skirting around words.
Mm-hmm.
We've been a lot of words, obviously, and language, kind of the concept of language quite a bit this evening. Just in the word hearing. In some other time and space and another culture, we would have another word for that particular kind of hearing that you're talking about, because to distinguish it from kind of oral hearing of language that we might do. One of the things we talk about a lot on contemporary animism is our need to re-language this work.
Right.
And I know,
okay.
You have the Irish language, I have the Welsh language, and I do sense that helps, because there are concepts that I can grasp onto that are from my Welsh language side that are closer to this work that we do than what the English language tends to be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's enabling in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd just like to hear your thoughts about that, because I'm very keen that somehow we generate or find or recover or remember into the English language some old words, or even borrow, so that we can have more nuanced language to describe these experiences that we have.
Firstly,
Like
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
You said you've got 13 or however many words for field.
32.
32, that in itself says there's a relationship with field that is deep here in some way.
Very deep in Ireland too. The farm holdings were much smaller that time. So there were different fields with different nutrients, really, for the animals. And each field had a different purpose. So each field had a different name, or it had a different. So in the word is the story. I mean, you're a storyteller. I think that is so important for delivering the richness that we're talking about in this conversation. When I talk about hearing and seeing, I see some things. I would say, to distinguish it, I would say I don't see with the outer eye. I don't hear with the physical ear. It's almost like there's another sensory receptor within the space that so I would call it the inner eye or the inner ear, to try and separate it, maybe, if we're to pull it apart or use it in the English language, you know.
Any closing thoughts as we...
And any closing?
Any closing thoughts, advice, wishes?
My wish is that more of us have this conversation. My wish is that we speak more to each other and to more people. And I suppose let's strengthen the connection with Source for all of us through our own practices, through our own groups that we may be part of. Because it can be challenging to have a narrative that's not in the mainstream. When you hear things like meditation on Strictly Come Dancing, we're getting places. I'm just saying, when we start to hear the words mindfulness, when we start to hear, oh, I don't know, it's just my instinct, or it was my gut, or we're doing a good job. Let's keep doing the work that on ourselves to bring it, to include more people in our conversation, really.
Brid, thank you. It's been a real delight to explore these deep and winding paths into the remembering with you this evening.